So this session is going to be about season extension and moving a structure. And the topics that Norma is going to cover are why would you move a structure, what's different about the ends, preparing the structure for moving, and a little bit on anchoring, but we will delve more into anchoring in the next topic as well. So take it away.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you also for everyone who is joining us today. And the concept of moving a structure is something that I think came out of necessity from people with limited budgets. Like they saw that a certain greenhouse was being used at a certain time and then it was sitting empty. But there wasn't enough time to start a new crop and get that fully developed and matured. And so came up with the idea about, well, what if we move a structure? And so now moving structures is actually becoming quite a common phenomenon. It's not something that is overly difficult, but again, it comes down to properly understanding what you're dealing with and what the limitations are so that you can be prepared. Now, when we're talking about moving a structure, we're sort of differentiating between like the concept of a tunnel, which you're moving tunnels regularly as well, but that's more of a thing of disassembling and reassembling it somewhere else. Whereas when we talk about moving a structure, it's more to do like you're actually moving it intact. So there are definitely things you need to do different so that you are ready and able to move a structure, because not every structure lends itself to being moved. So the reason or how people do this is you have a greenhouse in a particular location, we'll call it location A, and you start growing fairly cold tolerant crops in March and April. So now they're going to get started, and then at a certain point, they can stand up for themselves outside. So if you then move the structure down the line and you start another crop. So now we're still dealing with May, and so there's potential of frost and crappy weather and stuff like that. So now you can control that because these are more sensitive things that absolutely cannot take any frost. You need a lot more control over the climate. So what happens is you start growing that. Now, the material that's in location A, you're going to start harvesting that at a certain point. And once that is done, then you can prepare that soil and you can plant something else there. So what happens is in location B, that's carrying on down the season and you're starting to harvest that, and that will be finished before the end of the year. So now at a certain point, that greenhouse will now be available to pull back to location A, and you're going to protect those crops from frost and other weather associated with the fall, so that you can extend the picking season all the way, and a lot of times all the way to December. So it does require you to give some thought as to, okay, what am I going to plant here and now? And, what am I going to do next? There also is the opportunity of, like I described, an A, B, but you can also have A, B, and C. So you're going A and then B, and then moving it down to C, sorry. And then you can haul it all the way back. The advantage to that is you are planting in different locations. The ground is staying fresher. That is one of the driving forces behind a movable greenhouse, is it allows you more time to prepare the soil. The soil stays fresh because it is exposed to the outside. As a long-term thing, to have a particular area covered by a greenhouse all the time, you definitely have to take things into account of freshening the soil. A lot of our customers are organic based, and so weed control is a whole separate process. By having areas exposed to the outside, weed control and preparation for dealing with weeds is a lot easier when you have a movable structure. Now, and if you could put the slide on with that shows the skis, I just go over for a minute to show how a structure can be moved. Now, this is a very simplistic way of moving a structure. The ends of the base rail are curled up so that when it is moved, you're not going to be digging into the dirt. You can attach the skis to the bottom of the wooden base without the top rail being welded. It's more of a cost thing. If you're moving the structure a lot, the welded base as the top rail does add rigidity to it, but the ski at the bottom will protect the wood from making contact with the soil, and it does slide easier. Now, this doesn't lend itself to really large greenhouses. So this is something that is being towed around on a more small scale. The other thing about sandwiching the wood in between the two metal parts the way that it is there, a lot of our buildings have roll-up sides, and that just gives you a little bit more working height for the bottom end of the roll-up sides. Now, the other thing that really needs to be remembered when you're planning to go movable structures is in how you do the ends. So Andy, if you could bring up that photograph of the ends. And again, you need to give thought to what you're going to be doing and when. The main difference is, okay, are you moving off of something or are you moving on to something? When you look at the end here of this structure, the strip across the bottom is basically a flap, and it has a chunk of wood laying on it just to anchor it. When that structure is being moved onto something, and you can see that towards the front left, there was some row cover on things. And so some crops are going to be started. And when you want to move the structure onto that, you need to make sure, of course, that you're not ripping anything out of the ground. The same concept applies at the back end, is when you have something in that structure and you're moving it off of, then you want to make sure you're not ripping anything out of the ground. So that flap is something that is very important to consider. Now, in this case, this individual has got an upper window, which is part of the ventilation package. And so that can be lifted up early in the season when it's too cold to operate the roll-up sides, or certainly too cool for just opening everything up. But there's also a double door right below that window. They're the parts with the diagonal brace in there. So, but what you're getting here is something that you have to step over. So this individual is not going inside that structure with things like a wheelbarrow or a cart, because if that was the case in how you're seeing yourself working, then then you would have to make changes. And you know, when you come to us with what you're trying to accomplish, like we can give you ideas. I'm not going to go over all of the different scenarios here. But one thing that that this slide also indicates is, and you may or may not be able to see it, but there is a row of anchor posts standing there already. So because when you're moving a structure and releasing it from the anchors for a short period of time, that structure is very vulnerable to changing weather conditions. So you need to be ready. If you don't have a double set of anchor posts, what you need to do is take some of your anchor posts out of the ground and do, especially if this is the first time that you're moving there, do a few test pounds just to make sure that you're not going to encounter an insurmountable object. And so this is all comes back to being prepared. And so,
Sure. Just a question: are they anchor posts or are they T-posts?
well, they are T-posts. In this,
So they're a little bit different from our standard anchor posts that can't really be moved, right?
Yeah, we're going to get into more detail of the actual anchor post, the actual anchor post variations in the subsequent presentation. But I just wanted to draw your attention to that now, that anchoring and all the different things that anchoring involves is even more crucial when you're dealing with a movable structure, because as I said, when you've released the structure and you're committed to moving it, the structure is in a very vulnerable state. So you better have everything worked out in your mind as to how that's going to go. And what I always suggest to people is, when this is the first time that you're moving a building, make sure that you have extra people on hand, because it's a lot easier to just quickly send a few people home than trying to round up some extra people if this is going a little bit more challenging. And also, once you've done it once, you know what it's like to move that particular building on that particular property. And you're going to feel like a veteran the next time around. Thank you, Andy, also for zooming in on that picture, because it definitely was an easier way of illustrating, and I think for the viewers that are here to understand.
We had a comment from AC that they worked at Kolapur Gardens, and this was the first experience with our movable tunnels, and a great structure with a smiley face.
Maybe I should get AC to confirm that I didn't tell any fibs or stretch the truth at all. And actually, with changes that have happened at this particular place, this structure has been now sold to another individual, and so that individual called me this week, and he was kind of being hesitant about sharing where he'd gotten it, but there were enough details that came out that I said, you know, did you get it from so-and-so? Oh, yeah. So anyway, but that was good. That I appreciate it when people call me to clarify things, because in a lot of cases, it takes less time to try and clarify something than trying to fix something after the problem.
AC says no fibs, Norm.
Now, one thing that I'll just, since Andy just brought this picture up, when you're moving a structure with a tractor, that seems like the easiest way to do it. The one thing that I always caution people about is that when you're moving a structure with a tractor, You can't hear the structure complain. If you're not doing something right, there's going to be a problem, and you'll see that problem before you hear something. So that's why, like, a lot of times I encourage people to use winches, or the odd time they just use people power. If something's not moving willingly and you hear creaking and grinding and groaning, it's better off to know why this is happening before you have a problem. And after you see things fall apart, you have to order some replacement parts. Are there any questions?
There weren't any questions that I saw come in, but if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, they can feel free. I added a couple extra links as well in the chat about a little bit more information on movable structures that you can find on our website.
Now, in most cases, when somebody buys a movable structure from us, from Multi-Shelters, then they're getting the skis. But there are also ways of putting wheels onto buildings and either rolling them right on the dirt or creating tracks with rollers. This is a lot more expensive to do it. If you do it right, it's easier to do it. And so it's something to consider if you're, for whatever reason, you're moving the building a lot. Like by a lot, I'm talking like especially once a week. And some of the like the shelters that are being used for chicken housing fall into that category. You know, then it warrants getting something a little bit more mobile. But again, none of these straightforward and as simple as what they look on the surface. So it's, you know, I just urge people to always do your homework, consider the ramifications of what you're thinking is normal or simple, because very seldom is it as simple or as normal as what it appears on the surface. And you know, I certainly encourage people to talk to neighbors that have done this before. But by the same token, I would always also suggest that when you do ask for input from a neighbor, you have to understand that that input may be coming from a point of experience on that particular farm. There are different kinds of anchoring challenges, different kinds of wind challenges, you know, soil challenges. Like that may not sound like much, but are a bit, like I said, a bigger deal, not as simple as what you might see on the surface. So, you know, just keep that in mind when you're doing your homework.
I found an example of the wheels.
The problem with those wheels, the big problem, is that it looks nice and it acts nice when it's new, but you get a few good sized weeds across that, it can quickly derail that. And so just keep that in mind. Any other questions?
You were very thorough.
And so, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about anchoring in a subsequent presentation and just get into anchoring more. As a point, I had an individual ask me this week that was looking at a structure for their chicken, housing their chickens. And so they were going to use these great big barrels that had the water for the chickens as weight. And so they would just strap the barrels to to there. And so he stated what the weight is and asked me if that was going to be good enough. And I told him that it was, but I asked him if his chickens could read, because I said, you're going to have to put a sign in there, do not drink this water. Because what happens is once they drink the water and those barrels are, a quarter full, half full, they're not going to weigh nearly as much and are not going to have the anchoring capacity that he needs. So the long and the short of it is that as an option is not predictable enough that I would consider that a viable option.
Maria actually made a comment right before you said that she loves these ones for chickens. And so it was perfect timing that you were talking about chickens right after Maria had made the comment about it.
And
so
again,
this is a little picture of some chickens.
I had mentioned earlier about the, having the flap at each end, and so that it doesn't pull anything out of the ground. Well, the consideration that you have to have when you're housing the chickens is that there isn't anything dragging over the ground, because if you have a slow moving pedestrian inside there that is not moving as fast as what you are, you'd hate to see a mangled chicken. To be just high enough that they can duck under them easily without it becoming an obstacle for the person who's managing it that has to step over anything that is really high. So again, it's all these little tweaks that need to be considered for making this a package that is going to do the job that you need it to do.
Did anybody else have any questions?
Yes, I would like to ask a question. It's it's a technical question. I'm not sure Norm can help me with this, but it's with regards to the weight of the structure and moving it with winches. So if I set up a winch in front of I would use 2 winches to move my structure, one in front of each ski.
Yes.
Now the winches are rated to be able to pull a certain weight. So if I have if the structure weighs 3,000 pounds, is it sufficient to have each winch be rated to 1,500 pounds, or does each winch have to be rated to 3,000 pounds?
That's actually an excellent question, and something that I've encouraged people to consider as a way of moving the winches. Now, I typically suggest that the winch has a capacity of pulling the weight by itself. And the reason for that is the resistance that it takes to get the structure moving is the equivalent of a lot more weight. Now, so one way around that, okay, let's say, for example, the structure has been sitting there for 3 months. And so it will be it'll be settled on the dirt and kind of stuck to the dirt. So if you go along with a pry bar and just pop everything up before, okay, so you release the anchors and then just go along and pry it all up so you're breaking that contact with the dirt, now it will move quite a bit easier, but there'll still be some dirt stuck to the bottom of the ski for the first little bit. Once it has moved about a foot, a lot of that dirt, that sticky dirt, will have brushed off. So then it's going to start going easier. So it's that initial movement that you're going to need to create. I forget which principle that is about, the force to keep something, to start something moving is a lot more than the force to keep it moving. And that's what you're dealing with here. And that's why a stronger winch than the actual weight that it will handle is necessary.
Thank you.
And see, this is one of the things that, like, you know, I made that comment about hearing the structure complain. If you're doing it with winches and you know, you have somebody on each winch and you have another person standing in the structure, if it starts making sounds that you know are not normal, you can stop. Whereas if you're pulling it with a tractor, like there's a way of pulling it with one tractor, like making sort of a triangular thing in the front so that you can keep the distance apart and pulling it. You know, it's just, again, one of those things to keep in mind. The other thing that pulling with 2 winches does, it automatically keeps the front separated. But one thing that you're always going to have to do when you're moving a building is having periodic places down the length that tie the 2 sides together, because as you start to move the structure, the balance is going to want to spread apart. So if the structure is 20 feet wide, you need to have straps to, or some sort of ties to keep it at 20 feet, because by the time you've moved it to full length, that thing is easily going to be 24 or more feet wide.
Maria also made a comment about that some people use chickens to prepare their gardens, so they keep the chickens until the soil is totally worked up and all the vegetation is gone.
And on that note, I've heard from quite a few of my customers that have a greenhouse parked in a certain spot and that they grow things, but they allowed their chickens to run in it for the wintertime. And so it just adds an extra level of weed control and compost. So they serve as double duty, and there's definitely the benefit to the chickens of being a more healthy environment for them to roam around in. As they say, win-win.
Well, and I mentioned too that for anybody who has Instagram, if they want to check out Fill Your Boots Farm on Instagram, they're posting all sorts of videos and pictures of their chickens and their structures from us. So was there any other questions? Nothing came through on my end, so we can wrap it up. And the next presentation, oops, hang on. The next presentation is going to start at 12:30, and there's no such thing as too many anchors. And the topics are the texture and direction of anchors, the holding capacity of the soil, loads are up, down, and sideways, and easy in and out. So we look forward to seeing you in 15 minutes.
If I can make one additional comment. This is the first time that we're doing something like of this magnitude, and we would certainly like to hear feedback from the participants as to what worked well, what you see as ways of improving it, so that we could do this again, because I definitely feel that this is a format that people appreciate, how we can share information, and we're looking to make it even better. And we need your feedback for that.